Welcome to the Dungeon Diehards. My name is Daniel, and I'm going to be giving a brief history and bio for our friend Esaum Yorgish, or as he becomes endearingly known, Old Shitface. Fall colors of the leaves began to muddy as the shadows lengthened and the burnt orange sky darkened with the setting of the sun on the small dale of Ashford. Esaum smiled as he hefted his scythe onto his shoulder and wiped the sweat from his brow. Delia would have the cookpot on the fire, and he imagined he could already smell a faint whiff of fresh bread wafting from the small thatch-roofed cottage on the edge of town that he and his wife shared with their two small children, Garen and Lysandra. Garen, at only 4 years, would no doubt be heading home from carousing with the village children of his age, and almost certainly would be home past his curfew. Little Lissy had just fallen in love with a corn-husk doll Esaum had fashioned for her, and would probably be burbling happily away on the living room rug in a fantasy that could only be enjoyed by the mind of a 2-year-old.
Delia, darling, sorry I'm late. I stopped at Treffin so he could sharpen my scythe for the East Field tomorrow.
Esaum stated as he brushed his feet off just inside the door. Delia, just setting the table with her back to him, straightened and turned to face him. A broad smile made the endearing wrinkles at the sides of her eyes stand out sharply as she took him in. How he had loved watching those wrinkles form over the years, her brown eyes meeting his green. "That's all right, dear." And she held a hand out as to hold him and pursed her lips for a kiss. As he began to walk toward her, a darkness descended upon the room. Delia began to move towards him. Esaum, walking forwards, the distance between them began to lengthen. Charred black and molten red outlines of cinder began forming on Delia's dress, burning holes in the fabric. Where the fabric burned away, the moldering flames moved to her skin. She continued to smile towards him, flames spreading out on the floor from her dress. He lengthened his stride to a run, knowing that if he could just reach her, he could put out the fire and all would be well. Tears fell wetly on his cheeks as he tried to catch his labored breath, the spreading flames beginning to melt the skin on her beautiful face. He couldn't reach her, her hands still extended towards him, imploring him to take her, to save her. Her smile had turned to white teeth and empty sockets. Flames were all around them now, and only a skeleton with stringy bits of flesh and gristle hanging from it, engulfed in an inferno of heat, stood where Delia had stood. Esaum fell to his knees and wept as the flames consumed him. Esaum opened his eyes, painful from being squeezed so tightly, trying to stop the vision.
Once again, you could not save her.
The voice.
How long will you deny yourself the power that will save the little ones?
An infinite expanse of nothingness had pushed itself upon him, visions of his past in his mind appearing over and over again. He had failed to save her. How long had he been kneeling here? His knees were moist from the dew on the long grass. It must be nearing morning, though little light came into the open courtyard as of yet. Hurriedly, wiping snot from under his nose, Esaum stood and, reaching up, straightened his turban. The Sikhs of Gugtarra had built their temple on this nexus of evil, using their power to keep it from leaching into the world around it. In the temple's center, though dead for hundreds of years, stood a once mighty tree. Gugtarra Temple surrounded the area in a sprawling expanse of white marble, covering thousands of square feet with the tree's corpse at its epicenter. Esaum had come out here over a year ago seeking help in finding his children, taken by reavers. Training in meditation had left him with very little of the peace that was promised. Looking around hurriedly and with one last glance up at the towering Titan, Esaum made no answer as he silently exited the sanctuary. The dry wheat rustled around them as Esaum and Master Tedric walked through the field. bright noon sunlight beating down on them.
You still seem troubled, my friend,
Tedric said.
though you progress quickly with your martial forms and have already had great success in your use of magics.
Esaum, head bowed, had to swallow the lump in his throat before replying.
My children, how could this happen? A year gone and I'm no closer to them. How could this happen? Why us?
Gritting his teeth,
it makes no sense.
Raising a wary eyebrow, the master reached down casually and plucked a dry stalk of grain. He began stripping the grains and chewing the raw seeds one by one, ruminating on the question as they walked. A soft breeze rustled their loose-fitting Sikh robes. Looking over at Esaum, Tedric held up one of the grains.
This seed may very well ask the same infinite question. Why me? A vast field of hundreds of thousands of seeds, and you chose me to pick. We Sikhs focus on the alignment and balance of mind, body, and spirit around accepting one fundamental truth. There is no reason.
Master Tedric turned and put a hand on each of Esaum's shoulders, locking him in his stern gaze.
What happened to you was terrible, yes, but no more terrible than what happens to the sheep slaughtered or the grain harvested. The world is chaos, randomness all around. All we can do is accept that what is. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you will find the peace that was promised.
Turning again, Tedric began making his way to the temple. And it was then that it all clicked into place. The world is chaos. There is no reason. What is, is. These ideals were precisely those that had been shown to him in his visions. If it happened to him, it could happen to others. He would make sure of it. All the colors of violence swirled in the nether of Pip's latent consciousness. His metaphorical pulse raced with the implications of what his molding of this material would do, how it would change the life of the first person to encounter it. Bringing all his will to bear, Pip concentrated all his considerable power into a black and red sludge-like sap, swirling and flowing down his bark and into his roots. With a last exertion of force, Pip pushed the sludge into the blade of grass, and inwardly smiled as he saw it turn sharp and solid. Boy, oh boy, would that hurt to walk on. Satisfied with his day's work, Pip had just begun to go back into his hibernation-like slumber when the door to his courtyard cracked open and the simpleton that he had been tormenting, just for amusement's sake, hurriedly slid around the door and closed it behind him, making his way to stand before the tree. Entering the man's mind, Pip said,
You come again, Esaum. Have you come around to my way?
In dejected silence, Esaum simply nodded. Pip could see from the man's thoughts that he had indeed accepted the truths of the nature of chaos in the world. Esaum's shoulders gently shook as he stood before the tree.
Then I have a task for you. Kneel,
he heard in his mind. Esaum knelt and immediately flinched in pain as something sharp pricked his knee. A bead of dark red fell from a small hole in his knee onto an exposed root of the tree. Esaum watched in fascinated bewilderment as it traveled up the rough bark and into a knot near the tree's base. A withered branch over his head trembled slightly for a moment before producing a tiny, perfect acorn. The branch lowered slowly to within arm's reach. He heard again the voice.
Take this piece of me. Find the surviving Tracy. He will give you a reward that will help you along your path.
Esaum reached up tentatively and plucked the newly formed seed. As the acorn separated from the tree, Esaum jumped back in shock as the old Goliath split down the middle with a sharp crack and the presence left his mind. Months later, Esaum was drunk. The formidable maid was yet another stop on Esaum's path of self-destruction. He had been looking for Tracy for months and following every hint he could. They had all led nowhere, and so he was drinking. He had given up. even going so far as to throw the little acorn away at one point. After sobering up, he went back and retrieved it, of course. There was no Tracy. There was no hope. There was the drink in front of him, though. Esaum watched in amusement as a tall, skinny fellow shoveled slop into his mouth and immediately fell unconscious. There was uproarious laughter from a man near him, and something about them selling this poor fool into slavery as a cook. Poor fool. Oh well. Fuck him. Esaum took another healthy swallow. The room started spinning and went black.